This week on Comic History, we're exploring the origin of Kurt Wagner, aka Nightcrawler, the teleporting demon-esque mutant and member of the X-Men. What's up guys, Roman from R&S Entertainment here, and welcome to another episode of Comic History, the weekly series where I explain and retell the iconic origins, storylines, and events in the world of comics. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the origin of Nightcrawler, as it appears in X-Men Origins Nightcrawler number 1. The X-Men Origins series was a collection of one-shot issues that gave complete origin stories for a number of X-Men and mutant characters, and so far we've covered Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, Jean Grey, aka Marvel Girl and eventually Phoenix, Bobby Drake, aka Iceman, Pyotr Rasputin, aka Colossus, Wade Wilson, aka Deadpool, and Victor Creed, aka Sabretooth. So if you're interested in learning more about the X-Men and their origins, make sure to check those videos out as well. Nightcrawler's history and origin has been heavily retconned and changed over the years, with the character initially a concept pitched to DC Comics by writer David Cockrum as part of the Outsiders within the Legion of Superheroes comic at the time. But after being turned down by DC, Cockrum would bring the character design and basic concept with him to Marvel, when he began working on the X-Men in 1975, which began with Giant Size X-Men number 1 and led into what has gone on to be called the Claremont-era of the X-Men, running throughout the late 70s and through the 80s as well, with Nightcrawler being a mainstay member of the new team of X-Men, including Cyclops, who was the only original X-Man to remain, Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, Banshee, Sunfire, and Thunderbird, though Sunfire would immediately quit and Thunderbird died immediately after joining the team. It would eventually be learned that Nightcrawler was the son of X-Men villain Mystique, along with his father Azazel, a mutant with demonic features who was part of an entire race of demonic mutants from biblical times. Our story begins with Nightcrawler being forced to perform acrobatics as an attraction in Max Getman's traveling circus, though Kurt is miserable and mistreated and only remains because of his adopted mother, Margali Zardos, who is essentially a captive of the abusive circus owner as well. This is a pretty big departure from other versions of Nightcrawler's origin, some of which have Kurt enjoying being in the circus and not portraying the circus employees as abusive and hateful towards him. In this iteration, however, Nightcrawler is kept weak and drugged between performances by regular injections of poison that allow the circus owner to keep him locked in a tiny cage until he wants him to perform again. Kurt wakes in a drugged stupor and hears his mother being yelled at by Getman, and she takes a few moments to speak to him at risk of her own life, crying as he asks her to tell him of their lives before this place. Margali tells him a story that Kurt knows is comprised entirely of lies designed to make him feel better, but he prefers the fantasy she tells him to the truth, which we see play out as his birth mother Mystique is driven into the forest by an angry mob, passing out at a river after tying baby Kurt to a floating log to attempt to save him from their wrath, which again is contradictory to a few of the past versions of Nightcrawler's origin, which include Kurt being given to Margali by a human birth father, and Mystique throwing Kurt down a well where he was saved by his actual father Azazel and spared. In this version, Kurt floats down the river until he is found by Margali Zardos and her 2 children, who are then banished from their gypsy camp when they refuse to get rid of him, with the other gypsies all believing that Kurt was a spawn of the devil and would bring doom on them if he stayed. The Zardoses are then taken in by Getman into his circus, with the young Nightcrawler being shown off as a freak of nature, though his depression and refusal to do any kind of performance for the crowd caused Getman to continually beat and abuse him, until one night, to avoid Getman's whip, Kurt backflips onto a tent pole, with Getman then deciding to put him into the main tent as an acrobatics act. Eventually, when Getman's business becomes too slow, he decides to sell Nightcrawler to the highest bidder, whether that was another carnival or a taxidermist who would just kill him and stuff him for an exotic display. Kurt's mother decides to free her son before Getman can have him killed, breaking his cage's lock with a shovel and telling him to run. Still woozy from the poison, Kurt stumbles into a torch sconce while fleeing, burning down multiple tents and drawing the attention of Getman, who chases Kurt into the woods with his men. Kurt is unable to see straight because of the drugs and trips onto the ground, becoming surrounded by the circus workers, who he trips with his tail and tries to avoid by leaping into a tree. Getman then has Kurt lined up against a tree at gunpoint, commanding his man to end Kurt's life and finish this. As Nightcrawler accepts death, his teleporting powers manifest as a survival tactic and BAMF him away, with Nightcrawler smiling to himself, realizing that he had this new power. Kurt escapes Getman and his men, and 2 days later finds a cathedral run by a Catholic priest named Father Wagner, who, although startled by Nightcrawler's appearance, does not judge him and offers him sanctuary. Kurt finds redemption and solace in the priest's kindness, and spends several weeks studying, learning, and working with the man while becoming a Catholic himself. One day, while helping Father Wagner paint the cathedral, Getman's whipping boy Armin stumbles bleeding into the church, asking for sanctuary himself and apologizing to Kurt for having led Getman's men there in his escape attempt. Wagner raises his hands and tells Getman that threats and fear have no place here, but Getman hits him with a burning torch and knocks him to the ground, saying that fear would find room. He leaps at Kurt, swinging his torch at him, and when Kurt dodges, the tapestries begin to catch fire, with Getman calling Kurt a devil. Nightcrawler manages to teleport Armin out of the church, which again kind of goes against his initial appearances in the comics, as it was extremely difficult for him to teleport other people along with him for a time. And he ports back in long enough to grab Getman, furiously beating him down as he teleports across the church. And when he has Getman's throat in his hands, Wagner calls out to him and begs him not to forfeit his soul by resorting to murder. And Kurt releases Getman, telling his men to take him and go. Getman sputters in anger and yells out for his men to kill Nightcrawler, but as they raise their guns, Kurt hears a voice telling him that they can't hurt him anymore. As he turns around, Charles Xavier introduces himself amid the mentally frozen men, saying that he was just like Kurt, a mutant, only his powers manifest in the mind. He tells Kurt that he would mentally compel Getman and the circus men to treat his foster family with kindness for the rest of their days, that Wagner would rebuild his church, and that Kurt could leave all of the pain and suffering behind to have a new life of compassion, surrounded by others with gifts like his. And as Kurt agrees to join the X-Men, he says that Kurt Zardos had perished in that church fire, and that from now on he would take the last name of Wagner to honor the priest who had shown him kindness. And that wraps up the origin of Nightcrawler, a fan-favorite X-Men member and mainstay member of the team from giant-sized X-Men through much of the Claremont era, and member of multiple X-Men teams since. Nightcrawler has an awesome design and concept, and honestly I think it worked out much better for his lasting value for him not to end up as a minor character in a Legion of Superheroes offshoot, but instead as a great international member of the X-Men team that many consider to be the best version of the X-Men throughout their history. This version of Nightcrawler's origin does have its conflicts and inconsistencies with multiple other accounts of it we've gotten over the years, but on its own is a very solid origin story that provided Nightcrawler with the pain and motivation to change his life and become the hero he would go on to be. If you're interested in the X-Men, their history, or the origins of other X-Men characters, make sure to check out the X-Men History playlist on my channel for a ton of other great storylines, including the origins of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Colossus, Deadpool, and Sabretooth, Old Man Logan, which covers the entire original Old Man Logan storyline, the incredible X-Men and Spider-Man crossover storyline, and the origin of the X-Men as a team, which covers the first ever issue of the X-Men and their formation. Also, check out the main comic history playlist for all sorts of amazing storylines, origins, and events across DC, Marvel, and others. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and leave me a comment letting me know what you thought about the origin of Nightcrawler. Also, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe to my gaming channel, RNS Gaming, where I will be doing regular live streams and other content soon. And check out all of my social media via the links in the description box below. That's it for today's video, guys, and I'll see you all next time.